Good evening. I'm Ed Gallagher, President of the American Scandinavian Foundation, and it's a great pleasure to see you all here this evening for this, the New York premiere of Out Stealing Horses. The film by Hans Petter Moland, which is in contention to be nominated for the Best Foreign Picture Academy Award. And this is the first screening of, I think, 8 that we've got coming up of the Nordic and Baltic contenders for the Best Foreign Picture nominee. It's a great selection. They are all listed on a card that you can find outside, so please take a look at that and come back. They'll be continuing through the next 2 months. It's a particular pleasure this evening to have with us the filmmaker, Hans Petter Moland, who has come here from Norway to be here this evening. Hans Petter is returning to Scandinavia House. He was here, I think, 3 years ago, showing his film In Order of Disappearance. Wonderful film, which I think had a terrific following throughout this country and Europe. He has made many films, and he has most recently in America been represented by In Cold Pursuit, which was an American version of In Order of Disappearance. 2 titles to keep it straight. So it is great to have him with us this evening. He will say a few words before the film, and we are very honored and delighted to introduce him, Liam Neeson, who starred in Cold Pursuit. So it's a great team we've got, and I want you to welcome them right now.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Liam Neeson. I had the privilege, and I really mean that, and the honor to work with this guy here 2 years ago. And I have to say, I don't care if it embarrasses him, of the 63, 64, 65 movies I've made since 1980, he's certainly in the top 3 directors I've ever worked with. You're in for a treat tonight. I'm sure many of you may have read the book by Per Petterson, translated into 50 languages that the film is based on. It's headed by the great Stellan Skarsgård, a wonderful cast. And it's a beautiful, beautiful film. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll keep it very brief. See the film instead of listening to me. The only thing I like to say is this film is from, obviously, Norway, and part of it is from quite a while ago, and what I like to refer to as the pre-Freudian era of Norway. It's Freud was alive or had been alive, but nobody had found out about him in Norway, so they had their own way of dealing with their problems. So please enjoy, and we'll see you afterwards.
Congratulations on this film.
Thank you very much.
Norway's official submission for International Picture at this year's Academy Awards, fingers crossed. So this is a best-selling novel by Per Petterson. So let's start there. How did you first come across this novel? What was your way into the story and deciding to turn it into a feature?
I was given a novel by a producer right after it was published, or it came out in Norway in 2003, I think it was. And I was it was a time in my life where I didn't really want to go into this kind of landscape, and I'd come off a really hard picture. I'd been in Vietnam for a year and away from my family, and I'm grown up in a place or partially grown up in a place similar to this. So it seemed like walking into another jungle that was a bit too intimate, So I passed, and I never actually finished the novel. And then 6-7 years later, I was, I had other people, have a go at it, and then I was offered it again by another producer, and this time I was totally fascinated and kind of saw a way into it that I thought, if I can get to make it like this, I would love to do it, and that's where it started.
So, to me, looking at it thematically, to me, it's a story about healing, about revisiting your past and reliving those experiences so that you can move on to the future as a healed person. That was my takeaway. What was your entry point into the story? Was it similar to this?
Yeah, or at least I think that's what what the film says or does. It's uh, I mean, my first fascination was in how little you get to know about. I mean, between 1949 and 1999, there's only two things you get to know about the characters. One is that he killed a dog, and the other one, his wife dies in a car accident. So you had to fill in the blanks, you know. But one of the things that you cannot fill in, which is he has this Gordic knot, which is the reoccurring, question about why his father abandoned him, and so in a way, I guess these, actually the few weeks that the film takes place in is a place where he moves on, and he doesn't get an answer, but he could live without it, and in a funny way, I saw that the story in 1949 and 1999 are kind of like parallel stories. As a teenager, he's a man in balance. He thinks he's in command of, his surroundings. He can even balance on logs, and he walks with his eyes closed. And as an old man in 1999, he's, as the fool he is, convinced that he can live out in the forest by himself and be happy with that. And gradually, of course, life comes and makes him lose his balance until he kind of regains it at the end.
I love the toggling between the two timelines, and particularly because to me it didn't feel like traditional flashbacks that we're all of a sudden back in a different timeline. It felt more easy, as if I was walking into somebody's memory. So I'm wondering how you accomplished that sense of fluidity.
Well, thank you. That's what we try to do, but that's the hard thing. In literature, you can do it, and what this novel really does is it really effortlessly moves between the two times. So trying to achieve that is much harder in film because it's you cannot stop the film and say, "Oh, I have to, read the last paragraph again," or so pacing and rhythm becomes really important, and also what brings you from one plane to the other. So utilizing both the tactile qualities of his environment and also sound, and allowing the audience to be as much as possible into his subjective experience was part of the challenge of it.
I thought it was done beautifully.
Thank you. And also not, some of those, they're not really flashbacks. I mean, you're 10 minutes in one time plane, and then suddenly when the two men are having New Year's Eve dinner together, it's just little short pieces. So, variety obviously is also an important thing. And it's trying to get the audience to go along with that way of telling a story, which you have no idea whether it's going to work. So, I mean, it's,
Well, it works wonderfully. They say, or at least I hear in film schools, that you're advised against making movies with kids and animals, and this film sort of has both. So I'm wondering what kind of challenges you dealt with. I'm sure they were numerous.
Yeah, kids, animals, water, and no voiceover, So.
Well, there you go. Checking all the boxes.
It's terrifying to have such a huge role. But he's a 15-year-old boy at this, when we shot this. But I mean, at the end, making every film is kind of a leap of faith, and this one, it's putting your career and your life in the hands of a 15-year-old is the big challenge, and in another film, it's something else. It's and you just have to chew off, one day at a time and try to make it work. He turned out to be a godsend. He was athletic. He was incredibly brave. I mean, emotionally. I mean, when I look at myself as a 15-year-old, I was like, I wasn't even remotely close to his courage and his willingness to, to be naked and emotionally, and also that, I knew that he had some talent, but also he was surrounded by actors that really helped him. Tobias, who plays his father, he was like a real father to him. I let him alone a lot, so they could have their own, rapport. The animals, he was willing to try out everything that was dangerous, and those.
Did you have a trainer on set or handler?
Yeah. I mean, he went to horse training, and he went with a stuntman in the water, but he had to do a lot of stuff. It's not an undangerous film to make for a 15-year-old.
I mean, it's a really muscular performance, both from an emotional and physical standpoint. And Stellan Skarsgård is amazing in it too. And you worked with him before. How did he come on board to this project?
He read the script, and we have done 4 films together prior to this, and he said, and he had read some of the other scripts and turned it down. So of the same. So he trusted me that I could pull it off, and that we could have enough fun with it together to explore it. So he wasn't hard to convince.
Let's turn it over to the audience for a few questions. Who would like to go? Yes.
Beautiful film, thank you. The star, the woman, the actress, she had virtually no speaking part, no dialogue, other than I think when she found out that her son had been shot. What was the decision-making behind that, not to give her a voice?
It's a question about the quiet performance of the actress that we see in one of the storylines, and the decision that went into making her part mostly wordless.
Well, first of all, it's a film that has very little dialogue to begin with, and I think, and I don't know if this is an American thing, but I think we put too great an emphasis on dialogue as something meaningful in films. Most dialogue is just crap, and it's
Agreed.
and we talk too much, and we certainly lie when we talk, So it would almost be presumptuous to say I know what words to put in the mouth of a woman who's lost her child and who's trying to stay in life. I think her performance is incredibly powerful, and I think she's no less of a presence in the film by having little dialogue. In fact, people that don't speak a lot, you get curious about because they have secrets. And I've had experience with this before. My second film, I had one of the characters, which actually I scratched all of his dialogue as 3 men in the Arctic in a film called 0 Kelvin, until finally one of them decides to leave because he gets too disgusted with the quarreling and fighting by the 2 other ones. And the fact that you restrain somebody's or that they reserve their voice for something that you are anticipating makes, I think, them more interesting and more compelling as characters. I mean, that's, and it goes for also some of the other characters. I mean, when Trond's father does not respond, there's a response in that as well. If you ask him a question and he does, or if he says to his boy, "Is that okay?" and he goes, "Yes, okay," and we see that he's lying, and yeah. what we say and don't say also means something.
And to follow that up, what you're saying about the characters in general in this film is so true, that they're mostly quiet. So how do you help them to get into that kind of headspace that they have to emote without a lot of words? Do you discuss backstories with them that are not necessarily in the film to help them assume that quiet character?
In this film I did for various reasons. Number one is, normally when you work on a film, you're surrounded by people of all different ages, and you feel like it's almost like an ageless world, because everybody has a function and a purpose and a reason to be there, and you forget about your own age. On this one I realized that I was the only one who was old enough to have farmed like they do and cut trees like this. So I felt like a sort of anthropological guide, if you will, and so a lot of the reactions of the characters were foreign to them. I can just give one example. Is when Paul Sverre, who plays Jon, and the father of the kids, and and Dannika's husband. How can he not tell her on the way back from picking her up that her son is dead? And it doesn't make sense maybe in the script. I think in the film it does for some reason. And my idea, and what I was talking to the character or to the actor about, is that obviously he's in shock. He's left his boy there and says, "Can you please look after?" Or you look after your young brother, at least that you can manage, And then the hours that he is, if he picks up the wife and she's in a joyous mood, spent maybe with her relatives who are like, having maybe a lighter life than what she's having at the time. And he would say to himself, well, maybe I won't ruin her mood right away. I'll let her tell how great a day was, and then I'll bring the bad news on. And that suddenly, it's too late to say it. And then you figure, her life, she's going to be devastated, and her life's going to be ruined anyway. So whether she finds that now or 2 hours from now, maybe it's not so important. Let her live the next 2 hours without knowing the horrors of her son. And I mean, it's to us, I think, doing something like that is, hard to grasp. But I think it kind of makes sense, And also I thought we're in these woods, and there's a forest, and there's a lot of animals there, and some of those animals are humans, and they are very much kind of like arch animals, arch humans in a way. They are mothers and husbands and children, and they belong to sort of like a eternal human river, as opposed to being specific to a time or to a way of being.
I think we have time for a couple more questions. Yes.
So in the beginning of the film, there's in the voiceover, it says something like to the effect of, by all accounts, I had a good life. And then you watch that he's experienced all this trauma with his father, with his dead wife, and now he lives by himself in the forest. And I'm just curious if you kind of wrestled with this, what is a good life? What does that mean with the character as you were developing?
The question about, let me repeat for everyone, the question about the establishing words that we hear in the beginning, that he's had a good life, but then we learn about some of the struggles that he's had. So just reflections on that. What is a good life?
I mean, it's when somebody says, I've had a good life, I think a red flag goes up that people, that's another version of lying. I think it's, if people's assessments are too rosy but on a superficial level, I think he thinks he's had a good life. So it's a way to say, look, I didn't go into the woods because I was traumatized, or he thinks I've had an okay life. This is a choice. It's not because I'm depressed or I want to commit suicide or whatever. It's person who has this idea that he's doing this out of a choice and out of strength in a way, as opposed to being, somebody who's devastated by, for instance, his wife's accident. So I think he's rationalizing it to himself that life's been good. You can tell he's not impoverished. It's a choice. And I think if somebody had told him, no man is an island, he'd say, well, I want to be an island, and that's my choice, And it's, he fails miserably, but but that was kind of how I'd, approached it, and I think it creeps up on him, he hadn't anticipated that this would happen to him. And it's painful, but it comes, it's got a happy ending, sort of. He's got a new friend, and he reconnected with his daughter. And I think both those old guys had very sort of low expectations of what life had to offer, for the remainder. So he's better off in the beginning in the end than in the beginning.
Let's take one last question over there. Yes.
Okay, I agree with the interviewer here that the going back and forth was beautifully done. It was fluid, but I did get lost in one place, which is the relationship between his father and the woman started on the day that she was trying to rescue the man that was staying at their house.
Mm-hmm.
And the husband suspected. Why did he not want to cover the tracks? He didn't. She said cover the tracks, and he didn't. Did he already know they were in a relationship, or was that the start of it? And then where were they going with their backup?
It's a question about the clarification at what point the relationship started between the father and...
Yeah, the first clarification is, which is sort of like second nature or common knowledge in Norway, is that Sweden during the war was a neutral country, so people would escape. Norway was occupied by Germans, and I think the voiceover says something to the effect that he was ferrying people back and forth across the border. So this is close to the Swedish border, and Trond's father. Yeah, exactly. Stellan's. Young Trond's father was ferrying them. Yeah, and she has been doing it, rowing up to, and I think there's a voiceover says that she would row up to him, and she would, bring some food, because everybody know that a man by himself would get a monotonous diet or something to that effect. So I think at least the idea is that he's already probably jealous or dislikes the fact that she's so engaged with this dangerous activity. So it's just kind of like a stubborn streak that comes into him when she's commandeering him, and in broad daylight, and it has devastating consequences. No, they would go to Sweden. So she rose up the river to Trond's father, and they were supposed to go to Sweden, and then the Germans, intercept them, and then they have to just leave the guy behind and escape. So if you had put it on a linear timeline, they would have left, and if they weren't lovers before, they've spent 1.5 years in Sweden until the war is over, so probably they were lovers by the end of it. But it's a bit of a putting the pieces together in a
Mystery.
Yeah, it's like a mystery. It's a little bit of an Agatha Christie, So, there was one man here I
haven't read the books. I don't really know what's about it. that scene when the person tells the kid about what his father did in the war. Is that true to the book? Is it bigger there or smaller?
The question about the scene where the man tells the kid about what his father did in the war, the question is whether it was true to the book.
Yeah, it's in the novel, and it's fairly close to what it is in the novel. Franz is kind of like a Greek chorus. He's the guy who tells you how it is, you know. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Oh, do we have time for one more? Okay, let's take one last question.
Thank you very much for this wonderful movie. My question is about the music that you decided to use. Was it originally composed for it, and how did you decide how much of it to use? You used it so judiciously but so effectively.
Question about the musical score that was for the movie and the use of it, so carefully considered.
I had a discussion very early on with a composer who had worked with once before in a movie called In Order of Disappearance, and he's a young, very gifted composer, and he's a master at making very beautiful music. But I was very adamant that it should be something that wasn't too sophisticated, and it should spring out of where the film is set, so it doesn't feel like a layer of something plastered on, if you will, to achieve some emotional, effect. And he said that's a very hard thing to do. And I said, well, if you reduce the palette and say you work a lot with rhythm, with tempo, and repetitions, if it's very minimal, if you have something repeated 4 times and the 5th time there's a change, they will have some progression to it, and I said try to use not traditional instruments but use percussive things that are part of this environment, so clapping and stones and sticks. So it's very organic, and I got him and the sound designer to work together so that you should almost not be able to feel what's music and what's just the sound design. And I'm actually very happy. I think they did a terrific job and had a lot of fun with it. It was also, I drove him crazy by throwing out, if you go on Spotify, there's like 18 tracks of beautiful music that weren't used, but I think what's in there is really something that feels like it belongs in this milieu.
It's a beautiful layer. I think we have to wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Hans, for being here. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you very much.